At the market, people covered their noses when Adaugo passed. At festivals, no boy dares dance near her. Even the palace servants feared her smell. Once upon a time, in the great kingdom of Umuaka, King Omenka ruled with wisdom. He had many riches, but his greatest joy was his only daughter, Adaugo. From the day she was born, Adaugo was different. She was big, bigger than any other baby in the kingdom. Her mother, Queen Olamma, loved her dearly. The people of Umuaka called her Nwanyoto, the sweet woman, because her laughter could brighten the darkest night. But something strange happened as Adaugo grew. When Adaugo turned 5, she started gaining weight quickly. No one knew why. The palace doctor gave her herbs, but nothing changed. By the time she was 10, she was bigger than the strongest warriors in the village. Then, something worse happened. An awful smell began to follow her. No matter how much she bathed, the smell remained. Some said it was a curse. Others whispered that the gods were angry. But her father, King Omenka, refused to believe in such things. "She's my daughter," he declared. "She's perfect." But the villagers did not agree. At the market, people covered their noses when Adaugo passed. At festivals, no boy dares dance near her. Even the palace servants feared her smell. One night, Queen Olamma wept. "My husband, what have we done to deserve this?" she cried. "Why must our daughter suffer?" King Omeka called the kingdom's greatest diviner, Dibia Ogidiga. The old man sat before the king, shaking his cowries. Then he closed his eyes and spoke. "The gods are not angry," he said. But something terrible happened before Adaugo was born. The king and queen gasped. Many years before Adaugo was born, King Omenka had been a young warrior. One night, he and his men raided a distant village. They stole food, gold, and even people. Among them was a pregnant woman named Nwanyeze. She begged for her freedom, but the king refused. "Take her to the palace as a servant," he ordered. That night, under the full moon, Nwanyeze cursed him. "May your first daughter carry the weight of your greed. May she bear a burden no man will desire." The next morning, she disappeared. No one ever saw her again. And now, many years later, her curse had come true. King Omeka was shaking. He wanted to undo the curse, but how? Dibia Ogidiga sighed. "This curse can only be broken by an act of true kindness," he said. "Adaugo must find someone who will love her despite her burden." The king called all the young men in the kingdom. "Whoever marries my daughter will become the next king," he declared. But the people only whispered among themselves. No one wanted to marry a fat princess with body odor. Days turned to weeks and weeks turned to months. No man came forward. Would Adaugo ever find love? Would she ever be free? Adaugo sat alone in the royal garden. She watched the bird fly freely in the sky and sigh. She had everything: gold, servants, the finest clothes, but she had no friend, no love. Everyone avoided her. Even her father's warrior, who feared nothing, feared her smell. But Adaugo was no fool. She heard the whispers. She saw the disguise in the people's eye. Still, she laughed. She laughed louder at every joke, danced joyfully at every festival, and smiled even when her heart was breaking. But at night, she cried. Would she ever be free from this curse? The king, desperate to help his daughter, sent messengers to neighborhood kingdom. He promised gold, land and power to any man who would marry Adaugo. Princes came, but they never stayed. Prince Jidenna from Uri took one look at her and ran. Prince Obinna from Abagina held his breath for a few minutes, but when he couldn't take it anymore, he fled. Even common hunters and farmers refused. "My king, I would rather remain poor," one man said, bowing low. The humiliation was unbearable. Adaugo sat in her chamber and wept. Would no one ever love her? One evening, a strange young man arrived Umaka. His name was Afam Efuna. He was no prince, no warrior, no rich man. He was just a traveler searching for work. His clothes were torn, his sandals were worn, but his eyes were kind. At the market, he heard people laughing about the body-odored princess. "Is she a monster?" he asked. "No, but her smell is worse than a dead goat," someone said. Afamefuna frowned. "That is cruel." Unlike the others, he did not laugh. Something told him there was more to the story. Afamefuna found work in the palace as a gardener. One day, while tending to the flowers, he heard soft sobbing. He followed the sound and saw Adaugo sitting beneath a mango tree. She did not see him. She was too lost in her sorrow. He cleared his throat. "Princess!" Adaugo gasped and turned. No one had dared to come near her alone before. Afamefuna smiled. "Do you like mangoes?" She blinked. No one had ever asked her such a simple question. She wiped her tears and nodded. "Yes." He plucked a ripe mango and handed it to her. "Then, let us eat." And for the first time in years, Adaugo felt seen. Day by day, Afamefuna spoke to Adaugo. He told her stories of his travels, of the great rivers he had crossed, and the mountains he had climbed. She laughed, this time not to hide her pain, but because she was truly happy. But Afamefuna noticed something strange. Each time Adaugo laughed from her heart, the air around her smelled fresh. Could it be? Would laughter the key to breaking the curse? Afamefuna became Adaugo's only friend. Unlike others, he did not cover his nose. He did not run. One evening, as they sat under the mango tree, he said, "Princess, do you know that when you truly laugh, your smell disappears?" Adaugo's eyes widened. "That's not possible." Afamefuna smiled. "It is, but only when you are happy from your heart." Adaugo thought about it. Could it be true? Had her sadness made the cause stronger? She decided to test it. That night, Adaugo stood in front of her mirror. She forced a laugh. The smell remained. She tried again, thinking of silly things, but it didn't work. Then she thought of Afamefuna, his kindness, his joke, his friendship. A real smile formed on her lips. She giggled, then burst into laughter. For a brief moment, the air around her smelled sweet. Her heart pounded. Afamefuna was right. But why? The next morning, Adaugo ran to the old Dibia, Ogidiga. "Dibia, my friend says my laughter removes the smell. Is this true?" The old man nodded. "Yes, child. Your cause is tied to your pain. As long as you suffer inside, the smell will remain. Adaugo's heart sank. Then how do I end my pain? Ogidiga sighed. You must forgive. She frowned. Forgive who? The past. Adaugo did not understand. Forgive what? The people who mocked her? The gods who cursed her? But the Dibia only smiled. In time, you will know. From that day, Adaugo tried to find joy. She played with children in the village, helped the palace cook, and spent time with Afamefuna. Slowly, something changed. The servants noticed it first. The smell. It is not as strong, one whispered. The villagers noticed its nest. Could it be that the curse is breaking? And then, one day, Afamefuna stood beside her and took a deep breath. Adaugo, he whispered. You smell like fresh rain. She gasped. Was she really free? That night, Queen Olamma held her daughter and wept with joy. My child, you are healing. But Adaugo still felt something missing. If I am free, why do I still feel pain? She asked Afamefuna. He looked at her with sad eyes. Because you have not forgiven yourself. Adaugo frowned. Forgive myself for what? Afamefuna held her hand. For believing you are not unworthy of love. Tears filled her eyes. She had carried shame for so long. Maybe it was time to let it go. Would she finally be free? Adaugo could not sleep that night. Afamefuna word echoed in her mind. Forgive myself. She had spent her whole life believing she was cursed, believing no one would ever love her. She touched her chest. There was a deep pain there, a wound no one could see. Maybe Afamefuna was right. Maybe her biggest enemy was not the curse, but herself. But how could she let go of something she had carried for so long? The next morning, Adaugo did something she had never done before. She walked into the village market without guards, without gold, without fear. People turned and stared. Some whispered. Some still covered their nose out of habit. But something was different. The strong smell that once followed her was gone. A little girl ran to her and held her hand. Princess, you are beautiful, she said. Adaugo's heart swelled. Maybe, just maybe, she had been beautiful all along. Just as Adaugo was beginning to heal, a dark cloud returned to the kingdom. One night, a woman dressed in black arrived at the palace gate. Her eyes were hollow, her face worn by time. I am Wanyeze, she whispered. The name sent chills down the king's spine. It was her, the woman he had wronged, the woman who had cursed his daughter. She had returned. King Omeka stood before Wanyeze, trembling. What do you want? He asked. The old woman looked at Adaugo. Your daughter carried the weight of your sin, but the curse was never about her. Adaugo gasped. What do you mean? Wanyeze sighed. The curse was placed in her, yes, but its power came from your father's pride, from his refusal to right his wrongs. The king's face fell. All these years, he had tried to fix Adaugo, but he had never once sought forgiveness. Wanyeze turned to Adaugo. Child, your laughter has weakened the curse, but it is not broken. Adaugo's heart pounded. What must I do? The old woman's eyes softened. Forgiveness must be complete. Your father must seek redemption. And you must choose love. Adaugo turned to King Omeka, the mighty king, the fearless warrior. had tears in his eyes. He fell to his knees before Nwanyeze. "Forgive me," he whispered. The wind howled, the sky darkened, then silence. And suddenly, Adaugo felt something lift from his heart. A weight she had carried all her life was gone. The next morning, the palace was different. For the first time, Adaugo stepped out and the air smelled sweet, like fresh flowers after the rain. The villagers ran to her, touching her hands, smiling at her. "The curse is broken," they cried. Adaugo turned to Afamefuna. "You were right," she whispered. He smiled. "You were always worthy, Adaugo. You just needed to believe it." Tears filled her eyes. For the first time in her life, she felt truly loved. But one question remained. Would she now find love? The whole kingdom rejoiced. Drum beat, dancers thrilled, and villagers sang Adaugo's name. "The princess is free," they chanted. But in the midst of the celebration, Adaugo stood still. She turns to Afamefuna. "You stayed when no one else did," she said softly. Afamefuna smiled. "Because I saw you, not the curse." Her heart raced. Could this be love? She had waited so long to be accepted, but now, did she dare to hope for more? That evening, King Omeka called Afamefuna to his chamber. "You are no prince," the king said. "You own no land, no title." Afamefuna bowed. "I am just a man, my king." The king studied him. "And yet, you are the only man who saw my daughter's heart." He took a deep breath. "Would you take her as your wife?" Afamefena's heart pounded. He had admired Adaugo, cherished her, but marriage? He looked at her standing in the moonlight, her eyes full of hope, and in that moment, he knew. Afamefuna knelt before Adaugo. "I have nothing to offer you, but I will spend my life making you happy." Tears welled in her eyes. For years, she had been offered to men for gold, power, and land. But this was different. Afamefuna was not choosing her for riches. He was choosing her. She took his hand and whispered, "Yes." The kingdom of Umuaka had never seen such a grand wedding. Villagers poured in far and wide. The drummers beat their talking drum until the ground shook. The sky was filled with bright colors. And when Adaugo walked out in her royal attire, the people gasped. She was radiant. She was free. She was loved. As she stood beside Afamefuna, she smiled. Not the first smile she had worn for years, but the smile of a woman who had found her place in the world. Years passed, and Adaugo became more than just a wife. She became a queen who taught her people that beauty was more than appearance, a queen who taught young girls that they were worthy of love, no matter what the world said. And whenever she laughed, the air smelled of fresh rain and blossom flowers. The curse was gone, and in its place, love remained.